If I asked you to picture the father of Western philosophy, you'd probably default to that museum view.
Oh, absolutely. The pristine white marble bust.
Yeah, exactly. Bearded, dignified, staring off into the distance with this look of, like, profound wisdom. It's the image of pure authority.
Which is so ironic because that image it's pretty much a complete fabrication from the Renaissance. If you actually bumped into Socrates in 5th century BC Athens,
You wouldn't be thinking philosopher king.
you'd probably be clutching your wallet and crossing the road.
He was startlingly ugly, right? And I don't just mean like rugged ugly. We're talking about a physical appearance that people at the time called a monstrum.
That's the word, a monster. But, in that ancient sense of something unnatural, something that it just defies categories.
How so?
Well, he had these bulging crab-like eyes that seemed to look sideways, thick lips, a massive potbelly. His friends, and these are people who loved him, they didn't even compare him to other humans.
Who did they compare him to?
To a satyr. Specifically Silenus, a mythical half-beast, known for being drunk, lecherous, and disturbingly wise.
It just sets the stage perfectly for what we're doing today. We are unpacking the Socrates chapter from James Miller's book, Examined Lives. And the mission here is to really to smash that marble statue.
Right.
We want to get back to the street-level reality of this man who basically invented the whole concept of the examined life and figure out why his version of that was so dangerous that his own city voted to kill him for it.
It's a story about a collision, really. A collision between this radical individual and a society that was kind of on the brink. We're talking 5th century BC Athens.
The Golden Age.
The Golden Age. But it's also a time of just immense volatility. You have democracy, you have a rich empire, and right in the middle of it all, you have this son of a stonemason who decides to completely rewrite the rules of how we think.
And before him, philosophy was what we'd call science today, right? It was all about looking up at the stars, asking what the universe is made of.
Exactly. It was cosmology. Fire, water, atoms. Socrates just turns the lens 180 degrees. He stops looking at the stars and starts looking at the self. He asks, how should we live?
What does it mean to be good?
Yeah, questions like that. It sounds simple to us now because we live in the world he helped build, but at the time, it was a seismic shift.
The tricky part for us, though, and for James Miller in the book, is that the guy who started this whole thing never wrote down a single word.
Not a thing. No manifesto, no lecture notes. He's a ghost in the record.
So how do we know anything?
This is the famous Socratic Problem.
Yeah.
Since he refused to write, he actually thought it weakened the mind. We're left relying on what scholars call the Socratic conversations. And they are. Well, they're all over the place.
It sounds like trying to piece together someone's life just from online comments. You've got the fans and the haters, and they aren't describing the same person.
That's a really good way to put it. On one side, you have Xenophon, who was a soldier, a very practical guy. He paints Socrates as this sort of helpful, pious, slightly boring life coach.
Harmless.
Totally harmless. You read Xenophon and you think, why would anyone execute this man? Then you have Aristophanes, the comic playwright.
Oh, this is the clouds.
Right. And in his play, Socrates is a total caricature. He's suspended in a basket, spouting what's called subtlest poppycock, teaching people how to cheat their way out of debt.
So fraud.
A complete fraud. And then finally, you have Plato. Plato gives us the hero, the modest, brilliant seeker of truth. But even Plato uses Socrates as a mouthpiece for his own ideas. So finding the real Socrates is, well, scholars call it a paradise of inconclusive guesswork.
But there are a few things we can sort of triangulate, right? We know he was lower middle class. His dad was a stonemason. And Socrates did something socially bizarre. He just quit the family business.
He refused to work. He abandoned the trade to, as he put it, sculpt himself.
What does that even mean?
Well, he made this distinction. Most people try to make a block of stone look like a person. He wanted to make the person themselves into a work of art. His own character was the raw material.
And part of that raw material was this voice he heard. The daemon. This detail always makes him feel less like a modern rationalist and more like some kind of mystic.
It's essential to who he was. From childhood, he claimed to hear a divine sign. But it wasn't like other prophets who heard voices telling them, go here or do this.
His was different.
Yeah, Socrates' voice was purely negative. It only ever told him what not to do.
A restraint.
A check on his behavior, exactly. If he was about to make a bad move or get involved in politics in a way that would get him killed too early, the voice just said, stop. It explains so much of his weirdness. He was walking through Athens, listening to a frequency no one else could hear.
That weirdness really comes to a head with the story of the oracle at Delphi. This feels like his superhero origin story.
It is. It starts with his friend, Chaerephon, who goes to the oracle, the most sacred site in the Greek world, and asks a very simple question. Is anyone wiser than Socrates?
And the oracle, speaking for the god Apollo, just gives a flat no.
Which, for Socrates, is devastating.
Hmm.
When he hears this, he doesn't celebrate at all. He has a crisis.
Why?
Because he knows himself. And he knows he isn't wise. He's painfully aware of his own ignorance. So he just assumes that God must be speaking in a riddle.
He decides he has to fact-check Apollo.
He launches an investigation. He goes to the politicians, the poets, the master craftsmen, all the people who were supposed to be wise, and he starts questioning them.
And this is where the Socratic method comes in. But it's not what we usually think, is it? It's not a gentle teaching tool.
Not in the street, no. It was much more aggressive. It was a logic trap. Let's say he walks up to a famous general and asks, "What is courage?"
Okay.
The general puffs out his chest and says, "Courage is standing your ground in battle and never retreating."
Sounds reasonable enough.
It does, but then Socrates would ask, "But what if the winning strategy requires you to retreat, to lure the enemy into an ambush? Is that cowardice?"
Well, no, that's just smart.
Exactly. The general has to admit, "No, that's smart warfare." So Socrates says, "Then courage isn't just standing still. Your definition is wrong. Try again."
And he'd just keep doing this until the guy was tied in knots.
Until the general had to admit he had no idea what courage actually was. Socrates stripped away their false confidence, and he realized that's what the oracle meant. Everyone else thought they knew things they didn't. Socrates was the wisest, only because he knew that he knew nothing.
That famous Socratic ignorance. It wasn't false modesty, it was an epistemological weapon.
But he used it on everybody. He became a public nuisance. He'd spend his days in the marketplace, the agora, barefoot, wearing the same thin, shabby coat winter and summer. He was completely indifferent to any physical comfort.
There's that incredible story from when he was a soldier that just illustrates this perfectly. The Potidaea campaign.
Oh, this is one of the best glimpses we have of him. He's on a military campaign. It's freezing cold. Everyone else is bundled up. Socrates is just walking barefoot on the ice. Then one morning, a thought gets stuck in his head. He just stops moving. He stands in one spot, thinking.
And he doesn't just pause for a few minutes.
He stands there for 24 hours, straight through. The other soldiers get so freaked out they drag their beds outside just to watch him. He stands motionless all night. Then the sun comes up the next morning. He says a quick prayer to the sun and just walks away.
It's like a signal to everyone that this man is not operating on the same planet as the rest of us. He's just detached.
He called himself a gadfly. He saw Athens as this great, noble, but sluggish horse that needed to be stung to stay awake. He was trying to irritate the city into being conscious of itself.
Well, the problem with stinging a horse is that eventually the horse is going to kick you. And Socrates made himself a huge target, not just by annoying people, but by who he hung out with. We have to talk about Alcibiades.
You absolutely cannot understand the trial of Socrates without understanding the scandal of Alcibiades.
Alcibiades was basically the golden boy of Athens, wasn't he? Wealthy, devastatingly handsome, charismatic, just the kind of guy who could get away with anything.
He was the rock star of the Golden Age. And he's obsessed with Socrates. It was this very strange pairing, the most beautiful man in the city chasing the ugliest.
And in Greek culture, these mentorships often had a physical and erotic component.
They did. And Alcibiades wanted Socrates. He wanted to possess that strange power that Socrates had. There's that famous story, which Alcibiades tells on himself, where he basically traps Socrates and tries to seduce him.
He's hoping to trade his beauty for Socrates' wisdom.
Right. He slips under Socrates' cloak, pretty much naked, and spends the night. And Socrates just does nothing. He just sleeps. Alcibiades said it was humiliating, like sleeping with his father. It showed Socrates had this superhuman self-control.
But Socrates wasn't just rejecting him. He was trying to teach him something, wasn't he?
He was trying to turn Alcibiades' lust for power into a love for truth. He wanted to save his soul. And this is the great tragedy of his life. He failed.
Utterly failed.
Alcibiades didn't become a philosopher. He became a monster of a different sort. He used his brilliance to manipulate the democracy. He launched disastrous wars, and then eventually he turned traitor. He defected to Sparta, Athens' immortal enemy, and helped them crush Athens.
So when Athens finally loses the war, and they lose badly, the public looks around at the ruins of their empire. They look at the traitor Alcibiades, and then they look at his teacher.
Guilt by association. People said Socrates is the one who taught him how to argue, how to question tradition. This is all Socrates' fault. The trial in 399 BC wasn't really about religion. It was political payback.
So let's set that scene. It's 399 BC, the Golden Age is over. Athens is humiliated, paranoid, and looking for someone to blame. And here's this 70-year-old gadfly who's been stinging them for decades.
The official charges were impiety, introducing new gods, which was about his private daemon, and corrupting the youth. But everyone knew what corrupting the youth was code for.
It meant creating more guys like Alcibiades. Now, in an Athenian trial, the normal defense was to get emotional. You'd bring your weeping wife and children, you'd beg the jury for mercy.
Socrates does the absolute opposite. He treats the courtroom like it's another one of his seminars. He cross-examines his accusers and makes them look like idiots.
And he doesn't stop there.
Oh no. He tells the jury that he's actually a gift from the god Apollo to the city. He says, I am the gadfly, you are the lazy horse. You should be thanking me, not prosecuting me.
That is a bold strategy when 500 angry citizens hold your life in their hands.
They saw it as supreme arrogance. But he was making a point. To beg for his life would be to admit he'd done something wrong. And he refused to compromise his integrity just to survive.
And even then, the vote was pretty close. He was found guilty by a fairly narrow margin. But then comes the sentencing phase, and this is where he really seals his own fate.
Right. In their system, the accuser proposes a penalty, in this case, death. The defendant then gets to propose an alternative.
And everyone expected him to suggest exile, right? Just, I'll leave town and never come back.
And the jury almost certainly would have accepted it. They just wanted him gone. But instead, he makes this counter-proposal that is just. It's practically a joke.
What'd he say?
He says, what do I deserve for spending my whole life trying to help you all become more virtuous? I think I deserve free meals for life at the Prytaneum.
The Prytaneum, that's where they fed Olympic champions. He's asking for a state pension.
He's asking to be honored as a hero in the very court that just found him guilty. It was such a slap in the face that the second vote, the vote for the death penalty, passed by a much larger margin than the vote for guilt. He basically forced them to kill him.
And even then, he had one last chance. He's in prison. And his rich friend, Crito, comes to him and says, look, the guards are bribed, the boat is ready, let's go.
Crito had the whole jailbreak planned. Everyone expected him to leave. But Socrates refuses. And his reasoning is just fascinating.
What was it?
He argues that he's lived in Athens his entire life. He raised his kids there. He accepted the protection of its laws. To break the law now, just because it was personally inconvenient for him, would be to destroy the authority of the law itself.
You can't just opt out of the social contract when you lose.
Exactly. He says, I am a victim of bad men, not bad laws. He chooses to die rather than betray his principles. He wants his death to be the final proof of his life.
The death scene itself is almost cinematic. He drinks the hemlock.
With preternatural calm, he spends his final hours discussing the immortality of the soul, comforting his friends who are all weeping. He basically turns his own execution into a victory.
Which brings us to the core concept of this whole chapter, integrity. And we use that word a lot, but Miller points out it means something more mathematical here.
Yeah, think of an integer, a whole number, undivided. In Plato's version of the story, Socrates is presented as the only human who is truly one.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning there was no gap between what he believed, what he said, and what he did. Most of us are fragmented, right? We think one thing but say another to be polite. We believe in being healthy, but we eat junk food. We're a patchwork of contradictions.
Miller contrasts him with later thinkers like Montaigne, who flat out admitted he was full of contradictions. Or Nietzsche, who said, we are strangers to ourselves.
Exactly. Socrates represents this terrifying, almost inhuman standard of total rational unity. A person who has examined every single belief, kept only the ones that are true, and lives by them with absolute consistency, no matter the cost.
But the irony is, as soon as he died, that perfect unity he represented just fell apart. His followers couldn't hold it together.
They shattered into all these different schools. On one side, you had the cynics like Diogenes. They looked at Socrates and they saw the street philosopher.
So they imitated his lifestyle.
To the extreme. Diogenes lived in a barrel. He barked at people. He showed total contempt for social norms. He took the shamelessness of Socrates and ran with it.
He was the performance artist version.
Yes. But then on the other side, you had Plato and the academics. They looked at Socrates and they saw the mind.
So they retreated.
They retreated into schools. They wrote these beautiful, complex dialogues. They studied math. They intellectualized him.
So you have the cynics acting like madmen in the street, and the academics writing books in an ivory tower. And both groups claim to be the true heirs.
Which suggests that the whole Socrates was something unique that just couldn't be replicated. He held the street and the mind together in a way nobody else could.
Miller ends the chapter with this really provocative thought. He suggests that because of all these conflicting stories, and because Socrates really became a literary character for Plato, we will never actually know the historical man. He's a myth.
But he's a necessary myth. He's the yardstick we use to measure our own authenticity.
That's the heavy part, isn't it? The Socratic ambition. It's a question that, honestly, it makes me pretty uncomfortable.
It should. The question is, are you the same person in public as you are in private? If you stripped away all the beliefs you hold just because your parents did, or because they're popular, what would actually be left? And would you be willing to stand by that core truth even if the whole world voted against you?
Most of us would take the exile. I'd be on the first boat out of there.
I think we all would. And that is exactly why, 2,400 years later, we are still talking about the man who drank the hemlock.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.